What exactly is remote viewing and how do people learn to practice it? Is remote viewing similar to psychic practices or is it something uniquely different? In what areas can remote viewing be applied and what types of things have been achieved with remote viewing? How has the military applied the practice of remote viewing and are they still practicing it today? Does remote viewing prove that consciousness resides outside the brain and do remote viewers have glimpses into things like extraterrestrials and the paranormal? Tonight, authors and remote viewers Debra Katz and Jon Knowles join me on the show to talk about their insights into the practice of remote viewing on this episode of Passion for the Paranormal. Okay, so joining me tonight are two guests. First guest is Debra Lynn Katz. Deborah is an internationally renowned speaker and founder and director of the International School of Clairvoyance, one of the first online schools in the world to offer interactive small group clairvoyant training in teleseminar and webinar formats. Deborah is author of You Are Psychic, Extraordinary Psychic, and Freeing the Genie Within. She has been a professional clairvoyant, healer, medium for the past 25 years and is a parapsychologist and research subject. She has performed thousands of clairvoyant readings to help people understand more about themselves, their lives, and relationships. She is also an accomplished remote viewer, having assisted with financial forecasting, business consulting, finding lost objects, and occasionally crime solving and even treasure hunting. My other guest is Jon Knowles, and Jon has a BA in philosophy from Harvard University and a Master's of Arts in English from UC Berkeley. He is author of Remote Viewing from the Ground Up, and numerous articles about remote viewing have been published. He is published in 8 Martinis magazine. He's also been active in the remote viewing community for over 20 years. Jon was training coordinator and viewer with Transdimensional Systems from 2000 to 2003, one of the most successful private RV remote viewing companies for a time, and project manager administrator with the Aurora Remote Viewing Group from 2005 to 2008, and a group manager, viewer, and membership coordinator in the Applied Precognition Project from 2010 to 2016. Debra and Jon, thank you so much both for joining me tonight.
Thanks very much, Gary.
Very happy to be here.
You know, Debra and Jon are also co-authors of the book Associative Remote Viewing, The Art and Science of Predicting Outcomes for Sports, Politics, Finances, and the Lottery. So, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me tonight. This is a subject I haven't covered on the show before, and I've wanted to for some time. Of course, I cover all aspects of kind of the unexplained and paranormal, and this is another one that just kind of fascinates me, but it's also one that I've had a hard time kind of wrapping my arms around, trying to figure out what exactly remote viewing is. So maybe, Jon, I'll start with you to get us going. What can you kind of give us and listeners an idea of what remote viewing is?
Yeah, sure. I can imagine some folks do have trouble grasping it because it goes beyond our normal senses, in the sense that you're trying to gain access to things that are not within your ordinary perceptual fields, like things that are beyond space, outside of your immediate area. Also in time, you can actually view things in the past and also some things in the future. That's precognition. And there are different ways to do this, but it's a faculty which we call psi, PSI. It's a form of psi, and it's been now in the public realm since 1995. Before that, for 20 years, it was done under the military auspices and the Stanford Research Institute. So that's just a real quick look at it.
Now, Deborah, you've got pretty impressive background, and you've been involved in clairvoyant type readings. You've been involved in parapsychology. Did that kind of lead you into remote viewing, or maybe you could talk a little bit about how you got involved in this particular subject?
Yeah, so I had already been studying and practicing and writing about intuitive abilities for a while, but I read books by Russell Targ and some of the early researchers of the U.S. government remote viewing programs. So I was interested in it since the late, I should say, 1990s, after the programs were declassified. And then, so I would just do informal experiments with my students and would notice that they would really be able to describe objects and photographs and things that I had over at my house when I was talking to them over the phone. So there's no way that they could see what I was holding up, but they were able to describe what I was asking them to describe. And I noticed some interesting things, like I would hold an object and maybe they weren't really doing such a good job describing it, but I would start to move the object, or I would manipulate it in some way, and then they would suddenly be able to perceive it and describe it and sketch it. So I was really super fascinated, because you do hear a lot about psychics and mediums reading people, but you don't hear so much about people using their intuitive abilities for these other applications, and many are physically based. So from there, I got into formal training with some of the former military remote viewers, and then eventually got involved in the International Remote Viewing Association, and kind of won a couple of research awards. And from there, I just went like full forward into the research end of things, and ended up going to a PhD program specifically so I could get better, learn how to be a better researcher and study these topics. And that's where I am today. And Jon and I have been involved in a number of projects together, and we've been part of an organization called the Applied Precognition Project that specifically does a process called Associative Remote Viewing, and specifically for using remote viewing for applications such as horse racing and sports betting and Forex predictions and elections and all sorts of things. So that's how we first met.
Interesting. Yeah, so you, of course, that's the title of the book, part of the title of the book, the Associative Remote Viewing. How does that differ from when we just talk in general about remote viewing? How does associative remote viewing differ from that, or is it just more of a refined type of remote viewing?
Shall I try that one? Okay.
So either one of you want to answer, it's fine.
Maybe we'll take turns. In associative remote viewing, you don't view directly the target or the objective. You view something else that's associated with an outcome. For example, who's playing tomorrow? The Braves and the Houston Astros are playing. And we might try to predict the winner of that game. And we'll use two pictures. One's a picture of Deborah, and the other's a picture of the Eiffel Tower. And we'll show those, we'll ask the viewers to do a session. That is to give us some impressions, written or drawings or words. And then we will match the session against those two pictures. We might tell them it's a scene, or we might not tell them anything beforehand. And then we decide which of the sessions matches those two pictures. And if Deborah stands for Houston winning, we assign that arbitrarily. If they draw out Deborah, then we're going to say Houston's going to win. And if they don't, we're going to say the other team's going to win. So that's the association. It's not direct of the target, but it's some arbitrary association in a picture, or it could be anything else, but mainly pictures. And mainly two pictures have been used in 99% of associative remote viewing trials.
Okay, so this is more about trying to predict outcomes, future outcomes then.
Right.
Yeah. It's a procedure to circumvent some of the typical pitfalls when you're directly trying to tune into something, especially if you're doing repeated trials. And so, for example, if we want to know who's going to win a horse race, a psychic can close their eyes and try to visualize, okay, what does the horse look like that's going to cross the finish line? But let's say there's 12 horses, half of them are brown. You have little guys riding on their backs. 3 of the guys they're all dressed in green. There's kind of too many similarities to be able to discern which one is being described, even if you got a description of a brown horse and a little guy in green clothes. So in order to circumvent that, you do, as Jon said, the association, and then that opens up a lot of different things that the psychic or remote viewer can describe, because then you could attach any photo, or it could be really simple, like colors, just assign one color for each horse and then tell the viewer, we're going to show you in like 2 days from now a color, I want you right now to tune into the future in 3 days and show us the color. And meanwhile, if we know what horse has been associated with what color, when they tell us, that allows to make the prediction for the future. So that's just one of many different approaches you can take to tuning into the future.
Yeah, it's I'm sorry, Jon. Did you want to go
I
ahead?
was just going to give another example. My wife works for a major medical company, and they were wondering whether a contract was going to be renewed. So I gave a number of viewers this binary ARV. I gave them a tasking, and there were two choices: the contract was going to be reviewed or it wasn't going to be reviewed. And the sessions clearly indicated it was not going to be reviewed. So that's one particular example that you can use. Aside from betting on the stock market or cryptocurrency, you can use it for practical things like that too.
Now, talk about, you've obviously been doing this a long time. Talk about probabilities of outcomes when you apply these types of techniques.
We were in the APP together for some years, and I was the membership coordinator for a while. And as a result, I got to see a lot of the statistics that were accumulated by about, I don't know, 1,000 viewers and about 25 groups or so. And back in that day, 2016, we had about a 60% accuracy rate, generally speaking, for groups. And that might not seem like a great deal, but there was a fellow in England who came to us and who was working for a major sports betting firm there. And they get all kinds of information. And his job was to bet thousands of Australian pounds every weekend. He was in Britain, but he was betting on Australian events and soccer games, I guess it was. And so he wanted us to produce binary sessions, but he wanted so many, we really couldn't produce that many. But he said to us, gee, we can only get 53% or so, 52, 53% accuracy with all of the information we have. And you guys have a floor of 60%. So that was very, that intrigued a lot of people. Unfortunately, over the last 5 years or so, the Applied Precognition Project group results have fallen down to about 51%. So Marty Rosenblatt, who's the founder and the main person who keeps that thing running, is not tracking the group stats anymore. He's tracking individual stats. And some of the individuals do, achieve over 60, 65%, very rarely 70%. Nonetheless, if you can achieve that systematically and regularly, you could make a lot of money in one of the different ventures like stock markets or crypto or other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I was about to say, if you're having over 60% success rate, I think there's a lot of people that would probably take those odds.
Yeah.
My luck in the stock market has not been so well. So yeah, those kinds of numbers I think would be something I would be willing to bet with. Interesting. Now, Deborah, I wanted you to touch on, if you don't mind, so that, psychic abilities and having this ability to be able to kind of, I don't know, perhaps see spirits or talk with spirits or any of the other things that you can do with psychic abilities. How does that kind of tie in, and how is that similar with what we're talking about here with remote viewing?
Yeah, well, it's really, in some ways it's all the same. It's just really about how you're approaching it. So there's different ways to approach a reading with someone. And even with a reading with someone, you could approach it as like a clairvoyant reading, clairvoyant / intuitive. You could approach it purely as a mediumship reading, where your goal is really just to get information from a spirit and not go into using your clairvoyance to read the person. So even like within that realm, there's two different ways and where you might use different techniques and you're kind of setting up rules for yourself. And then with remote viewing, there's different, it's really about how the setup is going, the protocols, the methodology. And that's why, because remote viewing came out of a research environment. And so it is very much in alignment with principles of experimentation. So typically in remote viewing, you're supposed to have very little front loading, meaning you're supposed to be blind to the target, to the subject matter. You don't know what it is that you're describing, or you have as little information up front. You do it systematically. Sometimes a lot of times it's done within a group environment, so each person has separate roles. There's a remote viewer, there's a judge, there's a project manager. So there's different ways to set things up. And so, for example, when someone contacts me and say they have, like I had a woman last week who wanted to know where a missing deed to some property was that her family's fighting her on, and she wanted to know if I could tune in and get the information. So at that point, I had to decide, okay, how do I want to approach this? If I approach it as a psychic reading, I can call her up and we can talk for an hour and a half or so, and I can tell her my impressions as we're on the call. If I want to set it up as a remote viewing session, at this point, I already know she's looking for a deed, but I can decide, do I want to be the remote viewer, or do I want to call up my friends or students or colleagues to be the remote viewers, and I can manage the project and not tell them even what they're looking for. So it's really in the setup how you're doing it, but essentially it's all involving psychic abilities. But you start to see where, you know, any successful project, and this is true of anything in all of life, and even within the psychic realm here, is it's really about there's a lot of different factors besides just the quality of the psychic information. And so that's really why our book here, which I just have next to me, which is 700 pages long, there's a reason it's so long. And it's not just about, you know, being psychic, it's about all the different the methods for judging and scoring and ethical considerations and what goes wrong in the process and how to overcome that, and some theories behind the different it's theories and practicals. So I'm not just trying to plug the book, but just say there's a lot to this subject. It's a lifetime worth of study.
Yeah, that's quite a large book to pour through, but sounds like there's a lot of good information in there. Jon, I wanted to, you mentioned the military application of remote viewing, that the military used to practice this. Maybe they still do, I don't know. I guess that's my question. So you said the military's declassified this. To your knowledge, is the military still involved in remote viewing? And who, if not, who is still really involved in the practice of remote viewing?
Yeah, to my knowledge, the military does not have a program, but there was a poll recently on one of the social media, and I think it was like maybe 80 or 90% of the remote viewers think there is such a program. But for example, Ed May, who's a scientist who was one of the founders of remote viewing at the Stanford Research Institute, he and Joe McMoneagle is one of the very leading viewers who was at Fort Meade in the military program. Both of them claim that for 10 years they tried to get a program reinstituted after it closed in 1995, and they were unable to do so. And Ed's a pretty honest guy. I think he actually is telling the truth there, even though there are secrets that they all, have to keep because they signed up with the CIA and other DIA and other organizations that required secrecy. So some of the ex-military guys are getting pretty old, but some of them had students too, and a lot of those students have been taught and are doing remote viewing. But also there's plenty who are outside of that. Although that's dominant, the people who use what's called controlled remote viewing, learned mostly from the military trainers, 2 or 3 of them in particular, seem to dominate the field. But there are others who use a natural method, which is what they started with at Stanford Research Institute. In the natural method, there's no steps, it's no protocol, it's no templates, but you just ask for your impressions and you give them, and that actually has been used successfully by Stanford Research Institute. But both Deborah and I trained with people who are using a much more sort of staged and formal method, and we prefer that. I certainly do. I think Deborah does too. When we're having a major project, and you have a number of viewers and you want to get a lot of data, some of these this controlled remote viewing and offshoots are the way to go. So there are a lot of people doing that. There's actually a flood of people coming into the field now, finally, because of podcasts and interviews like this. finally after 20 years. So there's like now 40,000 people on the Reddit remote viewing subreddit. May not seem like a lot of people, but about 3 years ago, they only had 10,000 there or fewer. And then in Facebook, there's a group with 10,000, another group with 5,000. But there seems to be a lot more people really pouring in now. And so there's a lot of new people, and us old folks are trying to, well, I'm old, Deborah's still young, but we're trying to, navigate that with all these folks coming in.
Yeah, there's really so much activity right now, and I just completed a paper on remote. It was a survey where we surveyed. It was just 108 professional remote viewers, but just to find out what kinds of projects they're working on, and it really spans the gamut of missing people and intelligence applications, business applications. What else? Looking for missing pets and people. And just basically anything that you would want to know information about remote viewers are using remote viewing for that, even for more esoteric type targets like questions about UFOs or ghosts or paranormal incidents, trying to get an understanding of what's happened. And again, some of these things are also explored by psychics and mediums, and it's just different approaches to exploring many of the same things.
Yeah, it is certainly, you can certainly see so many different types of applications, potential applications here. I guess the other question I want to ask, because it's mentioned in your background, Deborah, about assisting with law enforcement cases. Now, you hear psychics or mediums, and I actually had a guest on a little while ago who's claimed to have assisted with several law enforcement cases. Have you used this specific skill set to help in law enforcement cases?
Yes. And first, let me just share, just this week, I had, and this isn't law enforcement, but just an application of finding something that's lost or missing. So just this week, I had my second backup computer I couldn't find for 2 months. And I really hadn't tried to look for it myself, but I have a new class of remote viewing students, and they're only in their third week of class, but I assigned them to look for my computer. And my first student who wrote to me, I found my computer using her session within 3 minutes. And then there were two or three other people that I'm quite sure if I hadn't already found my computer through their descriptions, I would have been able to find it. So it really, and I've found my husband's keys when they were buried underground in a water spigot on a 2.5 acre desert property. So I'd say finding missing objects just on a personal level or for friends and family has been like the most easiest thing to use it for and most productive. But yes, I've worked on different cases, some high profile, some not so much, but one case there were a missing set of teenagers, and they were worried that they might be on the verge of suicide, but we actually saw that they would be home and coming back home in a police car in handcuffs, and that was exactly how they were brought home. I still don't know why they were handcuffed or anything, but I saw them during my remote viewing session and was able to tell the parents, don't worry, they'll be back home. And then there was a case of a missing girl in Virginia, and that was a very high profile case. And unfortunately, in that instance, it was very clear that she was deceased. And it turned out that the way that myself and other viewers saw the body, just pretty much, I won't go into it, it was very grotesque, but the way that we saw it was exactly how it was when the police found it. Now, we were not told whether or not our sessions were actually what led the police to finding it or contributed in any way, so we're not sure. We just know that it was a multi-agency investigation, and the project manager was working with 2 FBI agents for that investigation. And then I've had other missing people where I work directly with the parents, which is really, really hard to handle emotionally. And, you know, once you get some information that the parents can confirm is accurate, like maybe they haven't found the body yet, but they can say, yes, you described the circumstances in which she was missing and what she was like and what happened the day she went gone. You know, once they get that information, of course, they're so distraught that, like, in one set of parents, I had the father calling me like every day, you know, for weeks, just to see what else I was getting. And it was really, really tough. So myself and other remote viewers will say, you know, it's always best to not work with the families, but to work with law enforcement directly. So had some experience, but not as much. You may have heard of Pam Coronado. She's someone I sit on the board of directors with on the International Remote Viewing Association, and she's worked with over at least 30 different law enforcement agencies, and had a lot of success with her. And she had a whole TV show called Sensing Murder, where they worked on a lot of cases. So working with law enforcement is definitely something that remote viewers do.
Could I add to that a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah, so when I first got into remote viewing, I was part of Transdimensional Systems. And this was like in 1999, 2000, 2001. And after 9/11, we were tasked with doing an awful lot of, by the FBI, doing a lot of anti-terror sessions. And there was a team of about 12 viewers. Prue Calabrese was the leader. John Vivanco was her right-hand man. John's still teaching that method. Anyway, so we did hundreds of sessions, anti-terror work in New York City, whether there was going to be a flooding in the subways. But, you know, we never also got firm feedback if we'd actually prevented a terrorist attack or not. Another one was about there was going to be some attack on stadiums. So maybe the FBI took action, maybe not, but there weren't those two kinds of attacks in any case. So we did an awful lot of those. Since then, I've only done a few, as Deborah says. Pam Coronado is really one of the leading people here. We did do one on the Nina Riza murder case in Oakland. I was the project manager on that, and it was very instructive. The police, we weren't working with the police, but I went to the police and said, are you interested? And he said, make me a believer. So we gave him our report, and we did identify the killer right off the bat, but he was sort of the obvious killer. And the location, we actually got very close, but it showed us a lesson, namely that it's very difficult to get an exact location in a case like that, because the killer had buried his wife on the side of a hill, in a very steep hill, with poison ivy all around. And even as the police stood there when they made a deal with the killer, they said, if you show us the spot, you know, we'll give you 11 years. So they were standing around. The police said, this guy's lying, it's not here. And he pointed, and sure enough, there was the spot. And our remote viewer, Daz in particular, Daz Smith, who's one of the leading viewers, also publishes 8 Martinis magazine. He drew some amazing stuff and got us really close with Snake Road, which is 250 feet away. But we learned that lesson, that it's extremely difficult to get a precise location. Although there's a group called Find Me, which has ex-military folks in it, and Daz and others have viewed for that, where they find people, and they've had some success with that too. So it can be done, and certainly working with the authorities is better than working with the families, just to make sure you get results.
Yeah. In remote viewing, there's a term called the search problem. And so people don't realize the viewers could do a really fantastic job describing the location. And sometimes you could take hours, or I've taken days to describe locations and draw maps and things like that. But yeah, if someone is buried in the middle of a forest, or I just had a woman who her great-grandfather supposedly buried money in the 1950s in a national forest. And when she first approached me to see if I would take on the job, I said, well, do you really have a way to go into a forest and search? And she was like, yeah, you know, I'm prepared to do that. And so I do this whole session, and I mean, I do think the money is there, but it was like buried within mud, underneath railroad trusses. And I mean, it would have taken like excavation equipment and stuff. And, you know, just when I talked to her about it later, her plan was like to to walk into the forest with a backpack. And I was like, I thought you said you were prepared to do searching. And she was like, well, yeah, I took a week off of work. And, I was like, you have no idea, what's involved here. And that seems to be pretty common. I had another woman even this week, well, the woman from last week who wanted to find this deed to this land that her sisters were trying to keep from her. And I asked her the same question, and she said, yeah, I can, go look for this. And I saw that it was like in her deceased mother's house, and I gave her a really good description of the house. And then it turns out she hasn't been to that house in 10 years. Her sisters were taking care of her mother. She's had a falling out with the sisters. There's no way, they live in another state. There's no way she could get into the house. So what was the point of getting all these descriptions of inside the house if she'll, never be able to go in there? I don't even know where she was thinking otherwise, where else it would be. But and people just don't really think it through. They just think, and I guess sometimes just knowing that it's somewhere where they think it is, or somewhere where it's different than they think it is, maybe just for that peace of mind, it's helpful. But a lot of times just people don't understand all that's involved, and so much of it's going to be who has the power to do something with this information.
Sure. Yeah, I want to get back to the law enforcement part of this. How is it for both of you? It sounds like both of you have had involvement in law enforcement cases. Has it been more that you've been reaching out to law enforcement, or did law enforcement reach out to you? How did that kind of come about to where you got involved in these cases?
Go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah, I would say the majority of times they have reached out, or I was working with another project manager who already had a relationship with them, and then they reached out to that project manager, and then that manager hired me and a couple other remote viewers for the project. Yeah, it doesn't tend to work out very well to contact law enforcement because they're already so overwhelmed with information all over the place, and they don't really know how to deal with information from, psychics or remote viewers or anyone. So it's really necessary to, have them reach out, form a relationship with someone who does work with law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I'm surprised that this doesn't happen more often, especially with so many criminal cases that come to kind of a, I was a big fan of the show, The First 48. I don't know if you've seen it on TV before, but it's basically where they're investigating homicides. And if they don't find a good lead within 48 hours, typically the case often sometimes comes to pretty much a standstill. And so that's why the show is called The First 48, because they really need to get some sort of big lead within that first 48 hours, or oftentimes the case kind of goes cold. So I'm surprised myself that law enforcement, for some reason I got this Zodiac killer case that just keeps popping in my head. I mean, he has not been located yet to this day. Why are not more of those cases? Why do you think law enforcement's not reaching out to more people like you with your abilities in these types of cases?
There are people in the field who say that they have lots of coffee mugs from police cases, that people do reach out to them. These are some of the control remote viewing people. And I think there's quite a few police departments that do in fact reach out, but it's not in the local papers, it's not in the national papers. So I do think there's quite a bit of that goes on. But also you have the factor, like, I think even in the UK, there are like 200,000 people that go missing every year. So there's certainly a flood of more work than any remote viewers could accomplish, given the small numbers of remote viewers, because remote viewing is actually quite difficult in terms of being accurate. It's real, it's useful, but there's plenty of times when it doesn't actually come to fruition. Joe McMoneagle, one of the top viewers, an amazing viewer, he says people have this impression that I'm right all the time. I'm not, I'm wrong half the time. So there's that factor too, and a lot of viewers are not well trained and get involved with this or want to work with police. So there's, as Deborah said, there's a lot of factors here about, but I do think that police do reach out. Yes. Quite a bit.
Yeah. There's so much more than most people realize, whether it's the police themselves or special agents or the families themselves working with all different levels of psychics. So it's happening a lot. But, again, getting back to the search problem, I mean, let's say one detective is interested in working with a psychic or remote viewer. Is the rest of the people in their office or unit open to it? And are they going to be open to it enough to spend the tremendous amount of resources involved to go follow up on that information? So depending on where, if a remote viewer, is indicating that, a fugitive is nearby or a body's easily found somewhere, that's one thing. But if it's at a distance, they're not going to have the resources or want to follow through on it. So yeah, and the quality of information, I would say, is a problem, like overall coming from the general public, because a lot of times what happens is, people see these television shows, they see the news, and of course their hearts go out to the victims and the families, and they want to help in all sorts of, in any high profile case, you're going to have like thousands, maybe 10,000s of people having psychic experiences, trying to get the psychic information, dreaming about the case. And it's very possible that in a lot of times, they have accurate information, but then people don't really understand the level of information that's often needed, the amount of information that's needed to solve a case. So sometimes it may just take a few words, like with my student who helped me find my computer. She gave me 3 impressions and it helped me find it because it was right in my house. But other people, maybe they are really getting psychic information, but it's nowhere near enough to make use of it. Oh, I see a guy, he has, even if it seems specific, I see a man with red hair and he's got a big nose and he's 6'2" and he drives a limousine. Like that could be, that would be pretty specific. But now if that's someone on their suspect list, that might be useful. But then also the police have, investigators have to follow rules too about even if it's a suspect, will that hold up in court that somebody described the suspect? And that's the other thing, is in remote viewing, we can sometimes not be describing the truth, but what people think. So if you were an officer and the guy described was like your #1 suspect, maybe I described him because that's who you are thinking it is, that's who you want it to be, and maybe that's not even really who it was. So, hopefully, I'd like to think that more experienced psychics can mitigate that. But, sometimes that's going to be, they're going to describe the wrong thing. And then the other thing is sometimes they describe the right thing. I've had this happen. I worked with two detectives who were part of the Innocence Project, where they were working on behalf of a couple of guys that had been in jail for years on a case. And they really wanted to believe that these guys were not guilty. And so I did some sessions on it, and my sessions showed they were very guilty. And they weren't happy with that. They were very enthusiastic about working with the psychic, but they just wanted the information to confirm what they were thinking. So there's a lot to all of this for sure.
Yeah, I was just thinking of David Polides and the work he's done, the Missing 411 work, where he's researched all these missing person cases. And some of them are just an absolute complete mystery, how these people disappeared, and some have never been found, and under completely mysterious circumstances where there's been no sign of predation. There's been no sign that they wandered off in any one particular direction. They just simply vanished. Has people in your field had any success in some of these types of missing person cases?
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, and yeah, I find his work really fascinating. I don't know that anyone, I don't know of anyone who's tuned in specifically to any of his cases, and they are very mysterious, like where someone just disappears instantly and then their clothes are found like neatly piled somewhere, and then they don't find their bodies, or they find their bodies like miles away in a tree somewhere. And these would be really interesting cases to explore with remote viewing. Now, I don't know if you'd really be able to ever get verification, and that's the thing. Some remote viewers only that well, they much prefer to do sessions only where there's some chance of getting feedback. And so some of these mysteries, like what was the group in Siberia that had disappeared? Do you remember that case where it was a group of hikers, very experienced hikers?
Yes. Actually, I think the one that you're talking about, they all died under mysterious circumstances.
Right.
And the name of the case escapes me off the top of my head, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think even the Russian government came back and said after many years of investigating, they narrowed it down to some sort of avalanche. And a lot of people are still just shaking their heads about that case, saying, no way was that an avalanche, and it was very mysterious the way these people died. But yeah, it'll come to me. It's one of those things.
They were found outside, like their bodies scattered around, like way outside their tent, like in various stages of undress. And so the idea, sub-below temperatures, that these experienced people would go out without their clothes. So something happened, but the tent was intact. They had clothes neatly folded up with inside the tent. So yeah, it was really mysterious. So I just personally tuned into that. Now, I was already front loaded about the story, so I would call that more like doing a psychic session on it. And I did get I couldn't really get too much actually, except just some strange lights that were like just orb type lights happening. And then later when I looked into it more, there was supposedly something like that had been sighted in the area, but I never really got the meaning of it. So, but I just bring it up because that's the kind of thing that's, so fascinating. And maybe what would help is if you had a number of viewers who, again, didn't even know what the target was, and then they all came up with similar information. That's the theory behind keeping the viewers blind and sometimes using multiple viewers. Then the themes that come up, you might be able to have more confidence that, they're onto something, as opposed to, one person who already knows a little bit about the story. Jon, sorry, were you going to say
No, I was
something?
going to say another facet to this in terms of the paranormal is that, in the military, when they did projects of finding missing people who were kidnapped in Europe and so forth, that was all sort of realistic and understandable and rational. But there's a huge paranormal aspect to remote viewing, in particular with UFOs and aliens. For example, transdimensional systems, the group I mentioned, I've talked to 5 of the viewers who, I was a viewer too, but I never experienced what they did. They experienced sort of like hammerhead aliens coming into their bedroom. And the leader, Prue, got a very bad reputation because she had a dude talking to her in the bathroom, an alien talking to her in the bathroom. But TDS wasn't the only group that had this. Joe McMoneagle and Ingo Swann, another so-called father of remote viewing, Ingo Swann, they both had experiences with UFOs. Penetration's a book that Ingo wrote about his very strange experiences with aliens who looked like gorgeous women in the avocado section of the LA market and stuff like that. So there is this connection. Some people don't want it, but now that sort of UFOs are finally getting mainstream recognition since 2017 with that article in the New York Times and with the Navy pilots, people are a little, in fact, I just saw the other day that some of the people in the UFO community are complaining that UFOs are being linked with remote viewing, this freaky thing. Well, in the past, people in remote viewing were complaining that we were linked with UFOs. So there's a symbiosis there of some sort going on.
It's like the cart before the horse kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
But I just remembered the name of the incident was the De La Table Pass incident, I believe is the name of the incident we were just talking about that happened.
Okay.
And I want to say that happened in the late 50s.
That's tough. Right.
Yeah, so De La Table Pass, if I'm saying that right, I think was the name of that incident. This is fascinating stuff, Deborah and Jon. This is why I do this show. It's because you know, I'm also interested in how all these unexplained things kind of tie in. And so all the way from talking about consciousness and consciousness being outside of the body and not just resident in the brain, and the brain being more of a receiver of information, a sender of information. What say you, Jon, about consciousness and how this ties into it?
Well, I sure been studying consciousness lately too, and talking to Ed May and others about this. Yeah, my view, I have a materialist background, leftist actually, but this all makes sense to me that there's something going on here that's not Bertrand Russell's vision of a cold universe with nothing happening outside of material things floating around. So that the fact that you can do remote viewing and feel connected, you feel connected with other people if you're in this field long enough, you really do. Maybe it's partly telepathy. You go to conferences, you bond with people. So there's that going on, but also because you can remote view things that are in the future or in the past at a distance or in the present at a distance, the body, our basic mind, our brain can't do that. There's got to be something else going on with consciousness. And someone like Ed May, for example, who's one of the leading researchers of remote viewing and was the head of the Stargate program in the last 10 years, he's a materialist, and he thinks that consciousness is just an emergent property of neurons. But I think there's a flaw there. Emergent properties are when you have something like water and ice. Ice and water have different properties, but they're the same chemicals. So you can say that, yes, there's a qualitative change in a sense that you have new properties from the ice that you don't have from the water. But that's different from saying that a bunch of neurons are somehow going to conjure up consciousness by mixing together in some way. That's a whole different ballgame. So I don't agree with Ed May on that. I do think consciousness is, we don't know what it is exactly, but it's one of the most real things we have. There's been lots of explorations of it and lots of views in remote viewers about it too. A lot of speculation about quantum mechanics and how that relates to UFO, to remote viewing too.
Now, I wanted to ask, now that we're getting into this topic of UFOs and ETs, or just any other kind of, you know, paranormal related kind of topic, what, I guess, first of all, I would ask, what are the kinds of people that typically decide to get into remote viewing? And when they do get into remote viewing, does it expand their mind into these other kinds of areas often?
Yeah, well, you know, I may be a little bit different because I encounter so many people that are already in these other areas of clairvoyant development and mediumship, and then they'll come over to remote viewing. There's definitely people that only stay within remote viewing, and I think that, you know, they like it because it comes out of a history of scientific rigor and protocols, and it, you know, is sanctioned by the government, so it's more respectable. Remote viewing, you know, especially by many people who do remote viewing, it's something that where it doesn't have to conflict with their own self-image of someone who's rational and professional and scientific, but they can still use their abilities and not be seen as, you know, way out there. At least, you know, that's how they feel. And then those people may be very adverse to being associated with like being called a medium or psychic or something. And there have been quite a few people who are involved in remote viewing who take that perspective, and they don't like to be, you know, have the same words or definitions applied to them as other psychics. Basically, they're trying to divorce themselves with some of the negative connotations that have been placed onto psychics. But I think more and more there's a lot more crossover these days, at least the people that I meet and work with, where they're interested in all these different modalities. And they just, and you know, again, the modalities have similar applications, but sometimes somewhat different. And yeah, I think there's people, a lot of times they had experiences growing up, or sometimes maybe not so much in the past, but they have a near-death experience or something traumatic happens and they have an experience and they want to understand more. And then they start to realize, yes, this is something I could learn and develop and apply if I have some training or some assistance.
Also, there's a shortage of research money in remote viewing. And if anyone's listening who would like to fund research, having heard how interesting and important this topic is, it would be welcome. So there really haven't been studies of, especially lately, of people who've been coming into the field and their background. They did do some screening at Stanford Research when they were trying to find candidates to join the Fort Meade program, the military program. And they did come up with some characteristics they were looking for, like the people who are creative tend to be a little bit offbeat. Also, some people say people who had difficult childhoods can be quite good at this. So there's a difference between who gets into it because they just want to, and people who may have talent, but we don't really have any definitive characteristics of what makes a good viewer. But again, research money would be much needed. It's just terrible that there's not enough money in it right now.
Yeah, you brought up a good point here, John. It's a question that's been on my mind for some time here, and that is, if somebody gets involved in this, I mean, there's got to be people that have a little bit more of a capacity to be able to do this. Can anybody learn to do this, or is it kind of something like somebody who has some talent in music, or somebody who's athletically gifted and they kind of, you know, gravitate towards doing those things because of that sort of talent? Is it similar in this field, or can anyone pretty much learn to do it?
Well, there's a conventional wisdom is that anybody can do it, but there'll be a variability about who can really do it well. And again, there's a difference of opinion. Ed May and Stanford Research Institute claim that only 1% of the people are really good. But the fact that Ingo Swann was able to teach ordinary soldiers to do it, and many thousands of students since have come along who have some capability to do it, suggests that 1% is way too small a figure. Even 1%, of course, is millions of people worldwide. So, Deborah, you might want to add to that, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, I've been teaching for 25 years, thousands of people, and it seems like most people show progress. You know, I'd say 95% of people show progress, and at least the ones that I work with. And a lot of it is just really more, I think, yeah, some people are definitely more talented than others, although it's hard to say, like the ones that maybe initially aren't as strong. It depends how hard they work, how much practice they get in. Practice seems to make a big difference. Personality makes a big difference, and perseverance. And the thing with remote viewing is, in a lot of ways, it involves writing and drawing and keeping yourself organized and being disciplined and directing yourself. Depending on the project, again, sometimes it could take hours of describing, if not days. And a lot of people just don't want to do that much work. I have friends and students that love doing readings on people because they can get together with them, be in their psychic mode, and not think about it again. Whereas remote viewing just takes so much time, especially with looking for missing things in people. And so I have people who just tell me, yeah, this is way too much work for me. I don't want to work that hard. And there are people where I've seen their sessions, like when they're describing photographs and stuff, and they've had some absolutely fantastic results, but they just don't want to have to work that hard and concentrate that hard. So, and yeah, sometimes I turn down remote viewing projects because I just don't have the energy for them, but it's, easier just to meet with someone for a couple hours. It's just different.
Yeah. And, I'm glad you touched on that, because some people may be thinking they just buy the book and within maybe a day or two, they're learning how to do this. So this is something that, just like anything, it's going to take some committed effort to learn how to do it. It sounds like. I mean,
I do.
people, are they taking a lot of courses to be able to learn how to do this? I mean, it's something I guess you have to practice a lot.
Well, the thing is, you can have instant success. Like, I don't want to say that you can't. A lot of people will. And there's very simple exercises you could do. Like, you could just say, like, get a book, like a history book or science book, and then just close your eyes and just ask for an image to come in your mind of what you're going to see on a particular page. And then you just open up the page and see what's on there. And a lot of people could be really successful with that. Or, we're going to send you a photograph. Let's have you describe what's in the photo. And I do see a ton of instant success with that. But along with that success, there's going to be perceptual errors. There's going to be misinterpretations. There's going to be usually a mixture of some correct data. So it's not hard for people right away to see, wow, I've got some psychic ability. And, this sounds like so simple. Like, you might ask, well, if this is so simple, why doesn't everybody know that they can do this? But how many people are actually sitting down and trying to describe a photo or a page from a book with their psychic abilities? Just so many people, it's so easy, but so many people spend a lifetime never even trying to do that. So there will oftentimes be instant success. So you do not need training to just see some progress. But the training can just help in terms of getting over perceptual errors, misinterpretations, how, and whether it's training and practice and just, and not to say that someone can't, I think they can read, and they oftentimes do read books, watch, short videos, things like that. And they do have success. In fact, I don't just think that, I know that because I have people writing to me in my first book, You Are Psychic. It was more about reading people, not so much about remote viewing physical things, but people write to me all the time and say that they had a level of success. Whereas other people will write and say, I'm just not self-disciplined enough. I think I really need more of a structured class to, keep me on track. And so really it is how there's so much free information out there about remote viewing with websites. And there's just, if someone is self-motivated and really wants to do a course of self-study and they're going to practice, I would also say, like Jon was talking about, the social media forums, Reddit groups, Facebook groups. You could learn so much just from being on those forums and find out about free resources and stuff. It's just how self-motivated is somebody and how independently can they work.
Interesting. Yeah, I had a guest on quite a while back on the show. His name is Stephen Holly Martin. He wrote a book about a number of different things, and he cites some of the Edgar Cayce research going way back many years ago, all about consciousness, psychic abilities, past lives, and he did get into remote viewing as well, and cited a couple of cases. And one was about how remote viewers were able to locate the old, I want to say it was a satellite that was coming back into orbit. I want to say it was in the 80s, either late 70s or 80s. They were able to locate, supposedly from doing remote viewing. The other one was locating Sadaam Hussein. And I'm wondering if you guys have other specific cases you could cite, other than the two I just mentioned, where remote viewing perhaps has been credited with helping something, predicting a major event or finding something like that.
One very important one was Jimmy Carter, when he was president, was interviewed, and he said that remote viewers had found a missing Russian bomber in the jungles of Africa. And that was true. The viewers had been able to provide enough landmarks that when the researchers went in there, the Americans were trying to get to the bomber before the Russians. They were able to find and the natives had seen metal parts and so forth. Unfortunately, Jimmy Carter at that revealed the name of the project through the folder that he was holding, so they had to change the name of the project. But that's one of the most famous instances of the successful use of remote viewing.
Yeah, I think they show that too on the movie Third Eye Spies, directed by Hal Puthoff, and oh gosh, I forgot the other Lance Munja, who made Third Eye Spies, and they show the scene where Carter is acknowledging the
Right.
success. And yeah, and so the first case you were talking about with describing the planet, that was Ingo Swann and Harold Shermer in the I forget, it was maybe, what was it, John, when they described Jupiter, like 1975 or 76, somewhere along then, where they were able to get a really great description of the rings of Jupiter at a time where they didn't believe that there were rings. And so it took months until the very first satellite images came back, telescope images came back, verifying that and other characteristics they had gotten. And then the second one, at least one of the viewers on who was tasked with tuning into Sadaam Hussein was Lynn Buchanan, and he tells some pretty interesting stories. He was one of my first remote viewing instructors about that. So yeah, finding missing aircraft and hostages, and I'm not so good at remembering names and dates and things. But again, I have a paper coming out that that gives really answers your question really well with several different cases and details around that. So yeah, and you know, today I think some of the very same work is being done as well. You know, a lot of times, one of the problems when we were surveying professional remote viewers, they were very, very cautious about revealing names of clients and projects, because either they've signed confidentiality agreements or really adhere to a strict ethic of that. And I struggle with that myself. In fact, I've been sitting here thinking, I maybe about 2 years ago now, I guess it was 2 years ago almost, I worked with a very high profile UFO group, and I've not publicly revealed who the group was, but everyone's heard of them. And it would be really interesting to talk about. I didn't sign a non-disclosure agreement, but you know, just ethically, I feel like, okay, well, and it actually wasn't even talked about, but I still feel like, okay, you know, how would it be perceived if I just, you know, revealed that myself and a group of viewers were hired to do a project for them, where they wanted to see that we didn't know what the tasking was, and I really wanted to be blind to that to what the task was. And it turned out that what they wanted to know, or at least the lead person who's running this group, with the initials TD, I won't say more, but maybe you could figure it out if you know any leading UFO groups. The question was that we found out later what the secret tasking had been. So I told him to put it in a document into an envelope, the secret tasking, and then we would describe what he wanted to know. And it turned out that what he wanted to know was, would he and his partners have contact with the UFO or alien beings at some point in the future? So that was pretty interesting, because the other viewers didn't even know who the clients were. So they had this could have been a missing person case, it could have been anything. And every single one of them described UFOs and aliens. And I also did a session for that. I managed the project, but I also was a viewer on the project as well. And I had an experience that was very, very creepy. And what happened was, I was doing the session I was staying in a basement of my friend's house while I was finishing up graduate school. And so I did my session from the basement room. And as I was in there doing my session, suddenly I had this image of an alien hand. And like, I'm just, you know, going along, just seeing what I'm getting on my paper. And suddenly it was like in your face alien hand pop. And it was so real. Like it was clairvoyantly, but there was something about the imagery that was so real and so unexpected, and it had a smell. It, like, I could smell it, and that's the cool thing about remote viewing. It's not just viewing, it's sensing and using all, you can hear things and feel things and smell things sometimes, but I've never smelled anything that strange, bizarre, and strongly in a session. It smelled like mushrooms. So when that happened, it was so real. I got up and ran out of the room, and I didn't want to go back and sleep in that room because I kept feeling like there was a alien being in it, but it was something very old and ancient and weird that I'd never heard of anything like that before. It didn't seem like one of the gray aliens. It was something totally different. And some of the other viewers also got the sense of alien beings and describing them in terms that were very unusual, not like you would typically, just the typical aliens you hear about. So yeah, getting back to high profile cases and stuff, there is a discomfort by many to, reveal too much about that. And so that's another reason why, I have clients too, from a psychic perspective. I have a client that fills stadiums. She's one of the leading pop stars and was up for Academy Awards. And yet, she definitely doesn't want to be revealed who she is. She's very psychic herself. So she's a client and student, and I've even had her do readings on my son. She's very good. But again, it would be really fun to be able to say who these people are. I've got a couple famous now, like growing in fame, actresses as clients as well. But can't talk about them. And I think there's a lot of that. I have a twin sister that's a professional psychic as well, and she's got some, also famous high profile people, and she's the same way. She's not going to reveal who they are. But then people are like, okay, well, now we just have to take your word for it. We can't verify.
Yeah, the initials you gave rung a bell right away on the UFO group, but yeah, I won't go into it. All right, Jon, I wanted to ask you this because this is in the book. How are people applying this to finances and say playing the stock market, the lottery, anything like that? I know we're short on time. I just wanted to kind of ask this question as
Sure.
we're wrapping up.
I'll try to keep brief then. So all of those are being explored by some remote viewers and with some success. And we have chapters in the book where different people write their own chapter about their success, either with the stock market or horses or the lottery. And I want to speak on the lottery because that comes up a lot, and I was involved with it. People say, well, if you're so psychic, why don't people win the lottery? Well, it's not so well known, but there are at least 3 major wins. One, and we describe these in the book. One was for $101,000 by a woman that Deborah and I know in Massachusetts who won a pick 5 using an interoceptive method, meaning her throat and her stomach were the indicators for whether one of 39 numbers was going to be a winner or not. And she said that those indicators may change, but her partner went and made the bet for a week. They won the first day and they won $101,000, and we've seen the ticket for that, so we know that happened. Another one is by a group in Canada that won $325,000 with a person who's known in the remote viewing community, but he tends to keep a low profile. We asked him if we could quote his methods, so he allowed us. So the book contains his description of his methods, which was involved with a team that had a division of labor and a certain amount of blindness, need-to-know basis. In other words, they had a lot of photographs. I think, again, about 49 photographs, and they matched those with each number. And then they had viewers view the photos, submit photos, try to view the photos, which would correspond to the numbers. And they did win $325,000, and they also had some other wins they claimed, but they didn't tell us about those. The third person in Hawaii won $78,000 on a pick 5. These are all pick 5s actually, which are quite a bit easier than the $1 million ones, but nonetheless they're substantial. And then finally, I've had myself a fair number of pick 3 and pick 4 wins using a particular method, which I describe in the book. And it also involves the fact that you should not just bet on one day. You should bet the next 3 or 4 days because the wins will come in then too. So that's a real brief capsule of some of the methods that have been used with financials.
Yeah, and it seems like almost every day or every week I'm hearing about somebody having this success with a pick three, or even I heard today a woman who she did 3, and 2 out of 3 she got all 3 numbers in a row and won, and she's been working at this for a while. Jon, I'll have to write to you and add to our list. We're just keeping an ongoing list of resources and people. In addition to our book, like it's kind of like the never-ending book. So we're looking at specifically people being successful with describing letters and numbers, and just doing research right now to collect examples of that, as we also work on ourselves with letters and numbers. So it's we think it's a really important area, because like Jon was saying before, sometimes that, there are some limits to remote viewing and psychic work as of right now. And sometimes it's that people that they can give good visual descriptors or descriptors of, what would you say? That they're not giving like street addresses, right? Like if you're looking for a missing person, a lot of times they're not giving like the house number and street number. And so imagine like if you wanted to go to a friend's house and the only way I could get you there would be to just give you descriptors like, oh, go to this landmark and then go over to the next landmark. That would not be a very convenient way to follow directions. So really, if we're going to be even more successful with this, people need to get better at letters and numbers. And for a long time, there was this prevailing belief that maybe this is just something that psychics aren't good at. And our theory is that maybe it's just something that they haven't put enough work into. Now, there may be some people that are better than others at letters and numbers, and this is like a whole unexplored, well, it's been explored throughout parapsychology a little bit, but not anywhere to the extent that it deserves. And I think in the coming months and years, perhaps from what we're doing and from a small group of others, this is going to be a growing area, hopefully. So I think there's a lot of potential here. And I'm personally also interested in the mediumship end of this too, because I know mediums, there's many mediums who will, hear proper names and sometimes street names, people's names. I've certainly had quite a few people's names come in. And so I'm really interested in mediumship right now. And so I've just been doing work with my own guides to ask them to give me numbers and things like that, and just doing some preliminary work with that. I'm getting them to give me numbers, but right now it's not like I really have a predefined target. I just say, give me something, and I start to fall asleep, and then suddenly there's a number there. So just kind of working on that. But I think there's potential there. And I'm really excited about mediumship too, because Robert Bigelow, who you may have heard of, has his essay on evidence of survival after death. And so he has, some really big, what is it, a $500,000 reward for the first place, and then 10 different awards going down to $50,000 each. And some of the top psychical researchers in the world are submitting essays. I think they had, last time I had talked to one of the researchers at the Bigelow Foundation, and they're an aerospace foundation, sending shuttles into outer space, and they recently started their consciousness studies program, and then initiated this contest. And so they're going to be revealing who the winners of the essays are, but it's been just interesting to find out who's submitting to those. And then they're going to put all the essays on, and the essay is about what's the very best evidence for mediumship. So there's already been like 150 years of great evidence, and then of course there's the formal evidence, and researchers, and then there's all those wonderful paranormal investigators out there that I'm sure you interview, who have such like incredible evidence themselves. They may just not be operating on an academic or formal research level, and some of them have also submitted essays. So it's going to be really interesting to see, what comes from that. And I'm curious to see if there'll be some crossover from that and what we know about remote viewing, or just the relationship between all of these is really to be interesting. Oh, and what's interesting about that too is that some of the major players from remote viewing are the judges on the Bigelow essay contest. So Hal Pudoff, who was an original co-director with Russell Targ of the early psychoenergetics program, which was where remote viewing came out of, he's one of the judges on the Bigelow essay contest right now. Skip Green, who was involved in the remote viewing programs, he's also a judge, and Jessica Utz, who did the early remote viewing research, and she's longtime statistician, former head of the American Statistician Association, and very involved in remote viewing research. She's also one of the judges. So I thought that was really interesting that they're using experienced people in remote viewing for this whole area of mediumship and after-death studies.
Certainly will be interesting to hear the results of that contest. Well, Deborah, Jon, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's been just an absolutely intriguing discussion. It's a topic I've wanted to cover for some time. I want to share the screen real fast to pull up just an image of the book. So there it is, Associative Remote Viewing, the art and science of predicting outcomes for sports, politics, finances, and the lottery. So, Deborah, Jon, where can people find the book at?
Go ahead, Deborah.
Yes, you can find it on Amazon, and yeah, I'd say mostly on Amazon. And we also have a website for the book called arvbook.com, arvbook.com, and then you can find our contact info and other information about the book. And then I have a website. It's debrakatz.com, and you could learn about my other books and classes, debrakatz.com. And then Jon, I think you're at Jon Knowles 8 for your own website.
mprv.com is my portal, which has a bunch of different of my interests there. But yeah, thanks very much, Carl. It's been very enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, both of you, for spending the time with me, and it's been a great one. It's a very fascinating topic, and it kind of delves into other unexplained areas, just like we got into, which is all that stuff fascinates me. So have a great night to both of you, and thank you for the work you do.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate your thoughtful questions.
Right,
Thank you.